All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Dr. Darian Parker podcast. And today's solo cast is all about the case against specialization and physical activity and exercise. So, why am I passionate about this or why go over this? Well, one, I think there's incredibly excellent research that just came out this year and research in the past few years that really builds a compelling scholarly consensus about the case against specialization and how adding variety to your program adds longevity potentially to your life here. So, we're going to go over about four different articles related to this peer reviewed research articles that discuss and provide a compelling scholarly case against specialization. So, when you look at specialization, what am I talking about here? So, I'm primarily talking about specializing in one thing completely. So, for instance, you may have seen this. You go to the gym and you may have seen people who only do resistance training, right? That's it. All they do is maybe it's just muscular endurance, base resistance training. Maybe they only do body weight exercise. Maybe they're just lifting heavy, something like that. Or we all know people who just love to run. All they do is run. Running is their exercise, a stress reliever. To get out there, very cardio-centric. Or it could be someone who just does yoga, right? They're only doing yoga. That's their only mode of being physically active. You get the point for it, right? So specializing in one thing. And often this doesn't usually happen just by a person saying, I want to do this as my only thing. It's often people kind of just move into things that feel comfortable, feel good for them, that they really enjoy. But there's compelling research that indicates that there's just a better way to go about this. And having more variety in your program is going to be better for you, at least that's what the research indicates. And this doesn't seem like it's mind-blowing information, as I think anything in life, if you're more well-rounded, you're going to be more open-minded, and you're going to have a much fuller, more rich life in that sense. So this goes also for our physical activity life as well. So now that we've set the ground rules here, what we're looking at, let's dive deep into this. Let's not wade into it. So the first study we're going to look at is by Hahn and others, which was done January 20th, 2026. It's the publishing date. It's called Physical Activity Types, Variety, and Mortality. So by BMJ Medicine is the journal here. And so basically, one of the things I really like about this study is that in terms of the methodology, this is a long-term study, 30-year longitudinal study. If you listen to any of my talks in the past, I love to use meta-analyses and longitudinal studies. One, just because there's much more validity and strength in studies when they're, one, looking at a variety of different studies, a collection of studies versus one study, or looking at a very robust study that has gone on for a really long time that provides a huge amount of subjects or participants. So one thing about this is 30-year longitudinal study is incredible. Credible data that we can better generalize to the larger population. This study is done from Harvard and includes 111,000 participants. That's a massive number of people over that time. So it doesn't just look at how much people moved, but how many different types of movements they did. So for instance, like walking, weightlifting, gardening, tennis, all different things. And the findings were that the highest variety group had a 19% lower risk of premature death, right? So than those in the lowest variety group. So interpreted here, people who had more variety throughout their weeks and their physical activity program versus the people specialized tended to have a 19% lower risk of premature death, which is pretty amazing. And researchers look at this when we operationally define specialists. These are people doing one, maybe two activities a week. And those who are doing a variety are doing basically 5 or plus more in that. And we also see that in this study that people who are specialists hit a health benefit ceiling much earlier than the generalist here. And I also think, too, it's good to point out here is that as human beings, we often move in extremes. The nuance of moderation and well-roundedness is often missed by humans all the time. We either swing one way really hard or the other way really hard. So this idea of creating variety feels very foreign in our human behavior because we often just move so far in one direction or the other. But we know that doing that creates less of a health effect for that. So, what does this suggest? That the variety creates somewhat of a metabolic adaptation effect. So, when you perform the same movement, let's say, for example, just running years and years for N and doing no resistance training or diversifying your program, doing anything else, your body becomes mechanically and metabolically efficient. And this is great for performance. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but we don't see that it contributes incredibly long for longevity when we're in comparison to someone who would be considered a variety-based person or generalist. So a highly efficient body burns fewer calories and triggers fewer stress adaptation responses. So there's less hormesis for the same amount of work for that. The variety of movement types, this corresponds to a more diverse gut microbiome, right? So the gut microbiome is an incredibly important factor in our health and well-being. The gut microbiome is filled with different bacteria, some good, some bad. They're very malleable, I mean, they change very quickly. And this is where a tremendous amount of inflammation occurs in our body. And we know that when we have a variety of movement based off of this longitudinal study, it lowers systemic inflammatory markers. Now, why is inflammation important? Well, currently our best guess or educated guess related to advanced aging is because of inflammation. And where does inflammation happen tremendously is in our gut microbiome. Now, we also know that, disclaimer, you can go to one of my previous podcasts with Dr. Claire Merrifield, and the microbiome is not completely well understood all the way. But we do understand the systemic inflammatory aspect of it is pretty important. It's our best educated guess in terms of aging. So we're looking at this, getting back in here. So the lowest variety group, even those who were very fit in their specialty, again, think about someone who's a very fit runner or who has been weightlifting most of their life, have higher rates of overuse injuries. And also, we see this as people age in doing these kind of mono-based exercise culture, that their increase in injuries occurs too, especially in the 60s and 70s, where the highest variety group had much superior multi-planar stability, better movement in different planes of motion. They were much more adaptable and could handle unexpected physical stressors, which is really important. So I think something that's really, we're going to talk about this, is one of the things that really hurts people and individuality in terms of just doing one thing is that when they're exposed to a new stressor, whether it's, let's say, they're stepping off of a curve or they slip or fall, they're not used to it. So they're not ready to move in a different plane of motion for that. If everything's done in a sagittal plane, flexion, extension, or if everything's done in frontal plane, abduction, adduction, you're not used to in the other planes being multiplanar. It's more likely you're going to get hurt when those are introduced to you for that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So it's important that having variety gives you the ability to have better resistance or resilience against different movements that may come either voluntary or involuntarily in your life. So what's the independent factor or variable factor here? We know that this benefit of being a generalist held true even when total exercise volume was identical. So a person doing 5 hours of just running had a higher mortality risk than someone doing 5 hours of split between running, lifting, gardening, whatever it may be. So we know that, at least from this study, and it's a huge study, as I mentioned, 30 years, 111,000 participants, much easier to generalize this to the larger population, that if we balance this for the number of hours, that the generalist group is going to have a lot less mortality earlier in life here. So it's critically important that we understand that creating a movement portfolio is really important. And it talks about this in the study. So don't just track minutes in the gym, track your movement segments, right? So this is one thing I like to do with my workouts is having different movement segments, whether it's a mobility, stability segment, high-intensity interval training segment, a VO2 max segment, steady state cardio segment, right? A heavy lifting segment, which could be part of my high-intensity resistance training, aspect of a very calming, relaxing segment, which could be meditation, yoga, whatever it may be. Different movement concepts within that are really important. And then doing something week that you're not really great at, that you're just like, this is a new stimulus. I'm not used to doing that. Whether it's, hey, I'm going to go play pickleball. This I don't really play pickleball, or I'm going to do some roller skating. Whatever, introducing some variable activity that you're not used to doing is really important. So, what are your movement segments? Tracking minutes, I think, is actually probably one of the worst ways to go about training. I think one, because people aren't very truthful about their minutes, and what I mean is the relation of their effort and activity for those minutes. So someone may tell you, I went to the gym for an hour, hour and a half, but the actual work to rest ratio is completely off. How much they actually worked during that time probably equates more to like 40 minutes, 35 minutes, which is fine, but people would just often exaggerate how much they exercise in terms of minutes for that. So you're not really probably getting the best idea. Look at movement segments instead for that. So it's not a great metric. So understanding the actual work versus rest connection is important. I would encourage everyone to look at the variety score. And we're going to talk about this a little bit towards the end, how to get a great variety score with exercise here so that you're not a specialist, you're more of a generalist and introducing a lot of variety of stimuli within that. So to get a score of 5 plus, you need 5 distinct activities per week. I mentioned some of those in my own program, which I always introduce these things each week to provide variety and different stimuli so I know that I'm prepared for any type of movement. Okay, so we know that there's a nonlinear benefit as well. So research showed that about 5 to 10 hours of total volume, the benefit of more volume plateau occurs, right? So if we look at it, if we're doing more than 5 to 10 hours a week of anything, and this is also related to number of sets. I talked about this during the minimally effective dose episode that I did. Please refer to that when we talk about anything really above 15 to 20 plus sets of any exercise is diminishing returns. You're not really getting anything out of that. There's a sweet spot here. Same thing with the volume. Anything more than 5 to 10 hours a week, you're starting to train like an athlete for competition and things of that nature. You're really reaching a plateau there. So if you're already hitting your minimally effective dose, let's say for strength, adding a different type of movement is better for your lifespan than adding, let's say, another day of lifting. In my own program, I rarely lift. It's twice a week and generally roughly around 35, 45 minutes of continuous exercise, almost no break, high intensity resistance training, and focusing on work capacity within that and a variety of movements within work capacity for that. And knowing that I need to get at least generally around 10 sets of the different resistance training movements that I'm doing. Can get up to 15. Beyond that, I'm not getting a lot out of it and actually just causing myself much more damage and overwhelming my recovery capacity. So part of the aspect, too, of variety is that you're helping to improve your recovery capacity because you're having different variations of intensity throughout the week versus just hitting it hard or just lifting hard or just doing yoga or just running all the time, right? So the volume case, I've already made that the minimally effective dose gives you a lot of the benefit. And if you're doing that, there's really no need to just keep hammering it and doing that. So it's really important to understand that. All right, so that's the first study, Han and others in 2026. So brand new research here that's really important that shows the benefit and the importance of making sure that you're getting variety in your exercise program. This variety is critical for improving chances for longevity and also improving your ability to not burn out from what you're doing. One thing I always see, and I tell my students, is that, hey, you need to have variety in your program. You don't need to spend 2-3 hours in the gym. One, as your life changes and different stimuli and things come in and out of your life, responsibilities, you need a sustainable program that you can do with the minimal effective dose to get the benefit from it. And also adding variety is really important within that. So let's look at the second study, and this is a study related to neural reactivation. all right, and that effect. So this is by Shields and DeFreitas, September 2025. Again, a newer study, and is on an exercise intervention may counteract the deterioration of the motor neuron function in aging adults. This is in medicine and science and sports and exercise. So what's the deep dive here? So the problem is as we age, we suffer from denervation. So basically a disconnection of our nerves from our muscle fibers. And this specifically starts to affect especially our fast motor neurons, like ones that are responsible for very powerful, explosive, anaerobic based movements, right? So these are the first ones generally to go. And what do we know about this? This is generally one of the bigger problems about falling as people get older. We know that the incidences of falling multiply quickly as people get older and older. And as people get into their 50s, 60s, 70s, the incidences of falling increase dramatically. And one of those reasons is lacking the ability to counteract movements explosively to change direction, right? So if someone is falling, often that lack of fast motor neuron is what's keeping them from able to keep themselves from falling, along with a lot of other factors, stability, mobility, all those things. But having that lack of explosive muscle fiber and fast motor neurons is one of the first things that people lose without mitigating it through things like resistance training and variety of activity. Therefore, falling happens, what often leads into a traumatic injury, which can, especially in older people, end up in hospitalization stay and never coming out of the hospital and leading to death. I know it sounds very grim in saying that, but this is the reality of it. So this is a big fall prevention aspect in terms of motor neurons here. So in the study, researchers found that even short-term resistance training of 4 weeks can reactivate dormant fast neurons. This is a process called reinnervation. Looking at, right? So we have deinnervation, reinnervation for that. And so we know, again, kind of like the minimally effective time to doing this, 4 weeks, pretty small amount of time, a month of your life. So also we see the variety connection here. While specialized lifting keeps specific pathways open, varied movements such as changing speeds, directions, different loads, wakes up a broader map of the peripheral nervous system, right? We're adapting and have different stimuli coming into our body, or external resistance or different movements that the peripheral nervous system is starting to adapt to. Again, this linear pathway, this mono pathway of doing things creates specialization or adaptation for one thing, but not for a variety of things here. So what's our practical application here when looking at this was that save your nerves. That's the protocol here. Explain that variety isn't about muscles. It's about neuromuscular insurance. It's about novelty training by providing a variety of stimuli in terms of your movement. So how do we reinnervate besides just doing resistance training, which is incredibly important? One thing I'll talk about a little bit later in this talk here is about adding basically a clumsy exercise or a clumsy activity a week. Something you're just not good at. Now, one reason why we don't do this is because humans hate being bad at anything. No one wants to try something and feel like a completely out of place, a duck out of water, if you will. And we get self-conscious about those things. But maybe if we reframe that in the sense that this is going to help you to have better motor rate unit firing, it's going to increase adaptation in a variety of different movements, and different loads, speeds, change of direction. All these things are going to help you to withstand the different stimuli that come into your life that you're not prepared for, and one, to keep you from falling, which I can't stress this enough, that fall prevention should be a gigantic part of most training programs. Getting on the ground. I always say this. I do this with a lot of my clients. My goal is to get you to the ground. And not in an MMA way, but get you to the ground so you're sitting on the ground, laying on the ground, getting up from the ground, getting yourself used to that stimuli. So one of the things that happens with people, especially when they haven't, when they've lost and started to have the sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss, and they're losing that explosive muscle fiber, is they've not been on the ground in years, maybe decades, seriously. And down there feels foreign. As we get further away from the ground, as we get older, the ground becomes a foreign place to us. and therefore we're not able to handle that intensity of what happens there. So getting stress on your shoulders, your back, your legs, being on the ground, rotating, turning over, all these things are important in getting up to be used to that stimuli here. So that's also part of your nervous system. So how to do that? Do one clumsy activity of a week. So for if you getting down to the ground, kneeling onto the ground, laying on the ground is clumsy and weird for you, you need to be doing that. You need to be doing that much more often, right? So choose a clumsy activity of the week, something you're just not good at. And this could be a sporting activity or, like I said, something just like getting onto the ground, right? This is a rewiring. This clumsiness is opening pathways that reactivate those fast motor neurons and rewiring you to get used to different stimuli for that. Critically important that we're doing those different things there, okay? So let's look at study number 2. That's study number 3. So study number 2 is all about kind of neural insurance. Now we're going to talk about kind of the signaling or internal pharmacy, hormonal pharmacy from study 3 is your skeletal muscle as kind of an endocrine organ. So we're looking at 2 different studies here. So one study from Peterson et al. Or others in 2025 and Hoffman and Weigert from 2026, and bringing you really up-to-date, brand new information. The one from Peterson is called the myokine secretome, specificity of exercise-induced signaling pathways and inner organ crosstalk. And Hoffman and Weigert is skeletal muscle as an endocrine organ. And one is from Circulation Research, is the journal, and another one is from Endocrine Reviews. Again, one published in May of 2025, the other in January of 2026. So let's deep dive. What's the concept? Basically, the muscles are more than pulley systems, right? So the muscles are actually a gateway for signaling for internal pathways, this internal pharmacy. And this internal pharmacy is ruled through the contraction of muscles that secrete myokines, all right? So we look in terms of the Greek word myo equals muscle, kinos equals movement, all right? So myokines, this is a secretion of muscular movement hormones here, or signaling. So myokines are a subset of cytokines, right? These are small proteins used for cell signaling. If this sounds familiar to you, it should sound familiar, as we talked about in a previous episode, and I believe it was the minimally effective dose, about mitochondrial biogenesis and how this mitochondrial biogenesis does not occur unless there is enough of a stimulus over time to cause the signaling for that to occur. So look at it that way, that myokines are a way muscles contract, they secrete myokines, create this signaling process for changes. That kind of you create this myokine cocktail for that and a subset of that. So if you look at this, unlike, let's say, other hormones produced like a single gland, like insulin from the pancreas, myokines are produced by a variety of contracting muscular fibers. So it's also a signaling is like a chemical messenger. It allows your muscles to talk to basically all different organs in your body, brain, liver, fat cells, gut microbiome, all those different things. Really important to understand here. So we're going to start getting very specific here and why variety is critically important when we look at this kind of myokine cocktail mix here. So research from the Circulation Research, Endocrine Reviews, those 2 studies we talked about, has identified there's hundreds of myokines, right? But there are 4 that are the most critical for health and longevity. So we're going to go over those. So the first one is irisin. This one is much more of like your metabolic shifter, if you will. So this triggers a rhythmic sustained contraction. So it's triggered from rhythmic sustained contraction. So think about this as your steady state zone 2 cardio involved walking, gardening. This produces irisin. So what's the function of this? It travels to kind of your storage fat and signals it to turn into brown fat, which is more of a thermogenic fat. This increases your resting metabolic rate, your RMR, and improves how your body handles glucose. Okay, so this is one thing. So if you're only doing steady state activity, which I see a lot of people doing, especially in the gym, with just only using this for cardiovascular or cardiorespiratory endurance, you're just having irisin here. All right, so, but what about another one here, the BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, right? So this is essentially kind of your brain's fertilizer. We look at it this way. So what is the trigger for this? Well, high-intensity efforts and complex motor tasks like high-intensity interval training, sports or technical skills that involve a lot more complex movement or high-intensity effort where we're breathing really hard, providing close to failure-based effort in terms of weightlifting, those types of things. This is the trigger for this. And what's the function of BDNF? Well, what's also produced in the brain, muscle-derived BDNF precursors cross the blood-brain barrier, right? The blood-brain barrier is a barrier that allows certain substances in and toxic elements to not be in for that. So this promotes the survival of existing neurons and then the growth of new neurons, neurogenesis, basically effectively fertilizing the center of memory and learning, which happens in the hippocampus there for that. So if you're just doing high intensity activity all the time, you're only getting you're getting the benefit of this. But if you're not doing zone 2 cardio or anything, walking, gardening, all that stuff, you're not getting IRSIN. You see where I'm going with this here? Now, if we look at really long duration exercise, super long duration exercise, this triggers interleukin 6. All right. So interleukin 6 is generally seen as a pro-inflammatory when released by the immune system. Right. And there's benefits to inflammation, especially when pathogens are introduced in the body that are harmful to the body. Pathogens are harmful, and the body's trying to recognize to the first or second line of defense. What do we do with this? Inflammation often walls off a specific area and keeps other debris and junk out of the area. Now, when we look at this in terms of muscle-derived version of this, it acts as a powerful anti-inflammatory. So this inhibits a driver of chronic disease, which is TNF alpha, and helps lowering systemic inflammation, or which we've learned in the past 20 years, inflammaging, because we understand now that at least our current information that inflammation is probably one of our best ideas and educated guesses for advanced aging going on here. So exercise in general is a marker for anti-inflammation. However, if we exercise too much and have those diminishing returns and over-exercising, it actually increases inflammation over time for that. So having activities that are really long in duration triggers this to be anti-inflammation. Again, but doing too much of this can cause pro-inflammation here. All right. And then also we have Decarin, which is more of the structural guarding, which is triggered by also like really heavy lifting. All right. So we're maxing out. We're lifting as heavy as we can. This essentially, the function here is Decarin, this signaling that's produced, inhibits myostatin. So when we inhibit myostatin, this is the protein that tells you to stop building muscle. So we're inhibiting that. So by having Decarin, you're essentially turning off that speed limit for muscle preservation here. So what does this all mean? We're looking at, especially those 4 different types of myokines that are produced. Well, we're basically looking at if you're only doing one type of exercise or programming, then you're missing out on all these other secretions that are helping to provide variety and to improve our internal hormonal cocktail system or signaling cocktail system here. So the true power lies in this kind of crosstalk mechanism, right? So an inner organ crosstalk. Your exercise is just an incredible opportunity to influence all bodily systems. I talk to my students about this all the time. The exercise is the great panacea, and that it really affects every system pretty much in a positive way. It's very difficult for any pharmaceutical intervention to do that. So it's incredible. So with this crosstalk mechanisms, when we're secreting myokines, your muscles are constantly sending status updates, right? So think about your body is kind of a news feed, and as you exercise, it's creating a status update for that to the rest of the body. So like the liver, myokines, signal the liver to release stored glucose for energy, right? To the gut microbiome, and it signals to improve the gut lining, reduce inflammation, improve or decrease gut leakiness for that. to the bones. It signals to increase the density in response to the external load that's coming for that, right? So, and so on and so forth. All these secretions help to buffer the body and help it to get ready for activity, but also to build muscle and preserve it as well and mitigate the effects of things such as sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss here. So what's the practical angle here? Because we're talking about a lot of research here, but what's the practical angle here? It's just a balanced signaling prescription, right? So we want a full spectrum prescription of activities, right? So if you're only doing one type of exercise, you're only getting one type of signaling prescription from your internal signaling pharmacy. So you should be framing your activity program as signaling prescription program. So look at it as what is your minimally effective dose for structural myokines, metabolic myokines, all these different things here. So I have in the show notes everything you need for this. I'm going to have the research links here, and I'll probably put the table that I have here as well, which talks about this. So listen, if you only do heavy lifting, you're getting Decarin, but you're missing out on irisin, which is more metabolic efficiency. If you're only doing long walking, gardening, you're getting irisin, but then you're not getting BDFN. If you're doing high-intensity sprints, you're getting cognitive sharpness from the brain-derived neurotropic, but then you're not getting Decarin, which comes from really heavy lifting. So if we look at this, it's really important that we have a really well-rounded program. Again, this sounds obvious, but the important part here is to put that into play, right? You probably intuitively know, if you're listening, that it's better if I did a variety of activities versus specializing. I think what's interesting about this, we know this about sports activities, and when I was growing up, you always did a variety of different sports. I played baseball, basketball, track and field, did football sometimes, and that variety also keeps kids from burning out and provides a variety of skill sets that you're building. We know that specialization promotes burnout for a lot of athletes and kids, and there is plenty of data on this. You can look that up. But we should look at our bodies the same way, in the sense that when we're doing just one thing, we're just running all the time, we're just lifting heavy all the time, we're missing out on having a really high variety score, which is going to help us have a much better chance at longevity and quality of life here. So let's move on to the next part here, which is our goal is to achieve a score of 5 or higher each week. That aligns with this incredible research from Harvard's mortality data. And I love research, can't tell. And I think research gives us insights. It's the scientific method, right? We're learning, we're saying, what's the problem here? What's the intervention we can provide? And what is the outcome from that? Kind of a reductive or deductive reasoning here. And when we can have a huge amount of participants over a long period of time, we're giving ourselves the best opportunity to get the best information for a consensus in the time that we're in. Science is only as good as the time that we're in, and then things often change, and we have to do a new hypothesis often when there's different things that come into the sphere that challenge those things. So right now, I think this is some of our best information, and having variety is indicating that we're going to be healthy over time, but having a more well-rounded, more rich, more full-based activity programming here. So I'll also have this in the show notes and on our YouTube channel. I'll pin some things as well here. So, but let's look at category 1 so that we can get this together, your prescription here, right? So high intensity work. So for Decarin and bone density formation. Now, remember that this with a disclaimer that bone mineral density is most heavily improved in your preteen, teenage, and early adult years. Doesn't mean that you can't improve it as you're older, but much like anything with exercise, the earlier you do it, the better you're going to get. It's also much like retirement. The more you invest in retirement earlier in your life, the better the outcome for retirement you're going to have later in life. It's a very similar approach with that. So category 1 include high intensity work. All right. So 20 minutes potentially, or just look at movements of compound resistance training, squat, push, pull, carry, all these different things. Look at the minimally effective dose. It generally could take you 20 minutes or less to do this. Again, you got to hustle for this. You can't spend a lot of time resting. And my big pet peeve, you've got to get off your phones. People, if you're on your phones when you're lifting, scrolling, doom scrolling, looking at different things while you're working out, you're wasting your time. At workout, be focused when you're doing it, okay? So when you're doing the intensity, focus on 7 pillars of movement, the different aspect of that, such as squat, push, pull, lunge, hinge, carry. I like to also include getting down on the ground, resistance, power speed work, intense rib cage opening, hard breathing, movements, jumps, med ball slams, sprints, hard runs. Add this into your program. Doesn't need to be a long time. It could be a short amount of time, but focus on the movement segment and focus on different planes of motion and having intensity. Category 2, low intensity cardio, right? So this could be your continuous zone 1 or 2 movement, walking, light cycling. This, in terms of a time component, 20, 30 minutes, probably 30 minutes, nice and easy, or any outdoor activity that caters to a little bit of the clumsy factor or just caters just to being outside for variety. So this could be anything like hiking, gardening, any type of thing like that that you're doing outside that's low intensity, all right, starts promoting the production of ursin. Category 3, neural novelty and skill. This is our clumsy activities, right? So focus on maybe just doing something for a short amount of time that you're not good at. So this could be balancing, juggling, new pose. Actually, one of my favorite things is juggling. When I did my bachelor's degree at James Madison University, our final exam for the semester, one of my courses was learning how to juggle. This was an exercise science course. I had no clue how to juggle when I started. But our professor gave us the entire semester to learn how to juggle. And by the end, at the end of the semester, 4 months later, I could juggle really well. And I was creating new pathways. And to this day, I can still juggle without doing it. So I picked up that skill. It was really weird. I was throwing the ball all over the place. Started with socks first, actually, then moved up to using tennis balls. But do something fun like that you're not good at. Try a new yoga pose, whatever it may be, balancing activity. Do something that's multiplanar, a sport that moves your body side to side, rotationally. Do some swimming during the week. Do tennis, pickleball, paddleball. I don't care, whatever it is, create some neural novelty and skill into your week. Again, doesn't have to be a long time. You don't have to be outside for hours doing this. It could be 10, 15 minutes, 5 minutes. Just introduce something different. Category 4, structural and mindful mobility. This is required primarily for joint health, nerve conduction, velocity, moving through a full range of motion. I do this with all of my clients. I always do a variety of mobility and stability exercises with shoulder joint and hip joint primarily because these joints have the most laxity in them. So you sacrifice mobility. In fact, sacrifice stability for mobility here. It's important to be able to move your joints to the full range of motion. Important like movement with hip rotation, extension, flexion, adduction, abduction. Really important. Same thing with the shoulders as well. It's important to do this. If you need help with this, I have a great program for that. And so that's category 4 there. So if you do those things, right, you'll have a much higher category score. So how to calculate your variety score? Score of 1 to 2 is essentially a specialist. This is a person who's great at one thing, but they're missing all the other aspects that can potentially help with increase in longevity and adaptation to a variety of things. A score of 3 to 4 would be a functionalist. You're hitting the basics, but you're only really getting half of the kind of that internal pharmacy cocktail. And 5 to 7 is more of elite longevity. This is you're meeting the criteria for giving your best opportunity for better lifespan, health span, and so this involves doing all 4 categories of things during the week. Again, you may be thinking, this is a lot to do. I don't know if I can do all this. Again, don't look at it in terms of time. If you introduced all of these different things during the week, And let's say you just did the different movement segments and focus on this. For the resistance training, the minimally effective dose, 10 to 15 sets of everything, moving quickly, all right, and doing compound sets, which is basically the same muscle group, doing different exercises, a transition rest 15 seconds, basically, or 0 to 15 seconds, going right into the next thing, right? Some supersets can be great as well for that. Really important stuff to do. Adding in a VO2 max and steady state activity. Because if you're looking at this, you start adding these in, a clumsy activity, maybe doing that for 5 to 10 minutes, mobility 5 to 10 minutes. You could technically do all this in less than 150 minutes a week, less than 150 minutes a week for that. But it's going to require that you're going to push yourself. Now, the longest portion of this will more than likely be your steady state activity, because that might be something you're doing maybe around 30 minutes to do it, maybe 45 minutes. But everything else you can just knock out really quickly. You just need to get a little bit of that, the minimally effective dose. You may hear me talking a lot about the minimally effective dose, and I do that because I don't want you to waste your time in the gym. If you're in the gym for hours upon hours, it's unnecessary, right? If you're doing cardio for 2, 3, 4 hours, you better be training for a marathon if you're going to be doing that. Outside of that, you don't need it. You need to do the minimal effective dose to get you most of the benefit. And then you could spend your time doing other things. One of the biggest misconceptions for most people in the working out, or biggest thing that keeps them from working out and having a program, is that they think it's just going to take up too much time in their lives. We're all very busy people. We're struggling to manage all the responsibilities and the stimuli in life, and adding a huge amount of exercise programming seems daunting to a lot of people. And so we need to cut the time down, hit the minimally effective dose, have a variety-based program to hit all the different areas that we're needing to hit to produce all that internal pharmacy cocktail, and then to also be ready for different stimuli in our lives. If you do that, again, less than 150 minutes a week, will there be some discomfort with that, especially in the activities that are high intensity resistance training or heavy lifting or the VO2 max based work? Yes, it will be uncomfortable, but you're going to spend less time, and you can get more time back in your life. Some of it will be uncomfortable. Some will be more enjoyable. Some of it you'll feel kind of dumb because it's different and clumsy. You won't feel good at it, but you'll improve over time. So if you want to have the best possible life physically, you got to be trained for everything to be ready for anything that comes into your life. So those are the three research studies that were really excellent. I'll put those in the show notes. But in summarizing here, this is a large case against specialization. And our data is becoming incredibly consensus laden, and not only in this, but in sports participation as well, that specialization helps with so many different things in our lives. And being more well-rounded is not just a great lesson for your physical activity and exercise life. It's a great lesson for life in general. Be open-minded, be curious, be inquisitive, learn, take deep dives into things you don't know about, become informed. That's really important. Thanks for your time, everyone. I really appreciate you, and I hope that you find this to be incredibly impactful and valuable for you.